Welcome to another garden update. Today we're going to talk about a few things that we're doing to leave the garden in good hands because we may be leaving the Bosque soon. This is the Blackberry Garden. Come on in. So there were paths in this garden and I uncovered these paths, so now we can see that the garden's a little bit more walkable. If you saw the early videos, this was completely densely covered in blackberries, and the goal is going to be when the rains come, we're going to dig up the blackberry bushes and maybe spread them around and put them in other places around the property. For now, the birds seem to be getting to the blackberries a little bit sooner than we do, but we've had a couple tasty ones, as you can see, growing on certain areas where we can grab them. Yum. We had some problems with the soil quality in the pool garden. This wasn't used as a pool, so this didn't have plants necessarily in it and didn't have fish and that kind of thing. We didn't test the soil in here, but I did dig up the soil a little bit and add some chicken dirt and Terra Encino, which we tested in a soil testing video and another video we did here. And I added some compost tea and chicken manure just to kind of improve the quality of the soil here. Someone may come through and plant something here later, but we're not going to do anything here for now. We do have some things in these buckets. We have both ginger and turmeric growing in buckets. You can't really see too much other than the fact that these are starting to sprout. This next bucket's a little more interesting. But these are beautiful plants from what I've seen. So that would be the ginger. And then the turmeric is a little bit below the surface, so you can't see anything here yet. We've left these to get watered and to hopefully deliver some plants to either replant or to consume. Next, we're going to go to the pool garden. Really exciting things to be proud of around here, like for example this brand new latch on the door. This was an old door for the chicken coop, and we just grabbed it out of a pile of overgrown weeds, put it here, but then it's a little broken, so I just fixed it up and put on a latch. Wow, so cool. Come on in. It's been a few weeks since we did a garden update in here. Unfortunately, the result of this garden for us, which we originally planted on something like April 11th, was that the soil quality didn't really deliver us the type of growth that we hope to see in this garden. The other big problem was that we had a predator, which we still don't totally know who it was, but we believe it's birds, have eaten basically all of our beets and chard, which is a lot of what we planted in here. We decided to not plant in succession sort of parts of the keyholes. We actually planted those in little pots, and the idea is to transplant them to this garden once they're sort of more mature and ready to go. So it's a lesson we learned. Planting in the ground in an area where you've got predators doesn't always work. I think if we had to do it again, we would have just planted the whole keyhole bed, and we would have planted more densely, and we would have lost some, but we hopefully would have kept some as well. Right as you enter the garden, a Tomatillo is actually growing very tall, actually more tall than some of the Tomatillos in the plant propagation area. So it seems pretty happy. It's flowering. It's not producing any Tomatillos, but the flowers are an indication that it will soon. As we go back along the edge here, you can see in one of the last videos we had a big black tank of water here. We've actually moved that tank up the road a little bit and moved it across the path up into the orchard, and that allows us to just free up some more space in here and still, you know, feed the water to this garden all via gravity. So saves a lot of work. The hose is a little bit strewn over here, but we can reach kind of half the garden with the hose, and because it's just a short hose, and then we fill up watering cans and fill up the rest of it. The tomatoes are doing pretty well. We've got some tomatoes growing now, so that's a big change, maybe from the little babies that we might have shown in the last garden update. You can see at the base of some of them we put some human manure down, which we found in our soil testing videos to be quite nutritious for the soil. So we're hoping that improves the soil quality a bit. You've basically got two tomatoes side by side that were planted right at about the same time, and we're trying to see if one's going to do better than the other. But this one was always doing a little bit better, a little bit more further along. But this one's doing great as well. As you can see, we've got a string here tied to the trellis. So we've trellised these 4 plants now, and we're hoping they'll grow real tall, but we might not be here to see that. So Sherilyn's going to come in, and whoever else is here at the Bosque in the future, hopefully come in and take care of the tomato plants. These ones doing quite well as well. These were a little bit shorter. The stems you can see are a bit thinner. We did put human manure on this one and not this one. And the only other thing to comment here is that we planted basil at the base of these tomatoes, but you know, basil is a little bit easily identifiable. I believe this would be some of it here, but it hasn't grown super quickly, so we haven't really seen you know, whether it's going to survive or not. Some other interesting weeds that I like the shape of these ones, but we have decided not to necessarily pull up a whole bunch of weeds yet, not to disturb the soil. Some weeding may need to be done. Underneath these little greenhouses, we have other baby tomatoes that were planted from seed, and these ones are all doing all right. So it's a lot earlier in the process. It's been fun to grow tomatoes from seed as well, which I've never done because I'm a beginner gardener. So that's that. Next up, actually, interestingly enough, we've got a pomegranate that is we cleared around a little bit, and that's growing into the pool garden and is nicely flowering. So I'm not sure if this produces fruits, but beautiful tree to pay attention to if you're walking around these gardens. I'm not sure what we'll do about it coming into the garden, pruning and whatnot, but great tree. Here we've got some grapes. The grapes are growing up this trellis. The idea is actually to take some string and let the grape follow the string along the trellis. What we would like to do is perhaps to put these grapes somewhere else, which is why they're still in a bucket. So we didn't plant those right in the ground, and they're doing quite well. I mean, you know, the last garden video, they were probably here, and I forget how many weeks ago that was, but you know, they're taller than me now. The other grape we're going to train via string maybe up to this cherry or oak tree over here. And this cherry tree, by the way, has been really fruitful for me because I've made a ring, I've made a flute out of it. We made all of these sort of garden edge pieces with the cherry. So I really like cherry as a wood. It's fun to work with, and it's hard and useful. Continuing around, one thing we noticed like 2 days ago was that the ivy has come back. So we really tried to cut back the ivy, but we can see it coming back in the corner in here. So a future caretaker of this garden should keep an eye on that, or maybe we will just decide to try to go in and kill it again, because it will take over. Sherilyn knows way more about ivy and how much of a nuisance it can be. We planted a couple sunflowers here. The sunflowers are coming up, so those will be fun. I don't know if they will really grow to their full potential here, but I think they are not being eaten and surviving. Here we've got some chayote, which we heard was here, but when we dug up the garden and sort of like de-weeded everything, it wasn't necessarily apparent. Gladly, some of it is still here, so that's grown and shot up in the last couple of weeks. The pepper behind you as well did a lot of growth recently, so that's kind of cool, but could also take over. It's a perennial, and it's always here in the garden. Along the edges behind this bamboo, which we placed to just provide a little shade to not have too much midday baking sun on these plants, we've got a few bush beans. And the bush beans are showing various signs of maybe something where they're not totally happy, but these ones seem to be about to fruit. So kind of 3 different pods of bush beans. This one is the biggest. These 2 were planted next to each other and seem to be doing fine, but not growing super fast. And then the last one over there is doing fine as well. We did add some human manure to that one to see if we could see some difference in, you know, soil quality, making something grow faster. We weren't able to show this on the last video. The jicama is coming in here. These are all jicama. Even a jicama next to one of the bush beans on the other side. We've really enjoyed eating jicama while we've been here. It's great for dipping in guacamole. It's great if you're making some sushi rice and you're making a chirashi bowl. Really delicious. Some more permanent setup here for these screens, which unfortunately are to keep our predators away. But we've got arugula growing here, which is growing fine. In the back, we had some other greens planted, which have all been eaten, even though we've had these screens here. So that's a shame. We've lost a lot of that. As you can see here, we've lost most of what's here as well. I believe this is still a lettuce, but it's been chopped. Here, also, we had some things growing, but it seems like it's mostly gone. I think this might be something, but yeah, just you know, maybe a lesson in like there needs to be more of a variety of plants here to give you know, people like some of these predators something else to eat, or maybe just plant more densely so that they can eat some. Maybe create some edges with some barrier plants that they can eat. Finally, I guess one of the things that's doing all right is we've got some kohlrabi here. So this kohlrabi looks fine, but this one was completely eaten. So that happened a lot. There was kohlrabi all in this keyhole bed, and it's mostly eaten. We planted some basil and maybe something else back there, but it also not doing super well. The radishes are doing all right. I think Seriel dug around one of them to see if there was anything down there, but not really much to be spoken for. Those were supposed to have a 4 to 12 day germination time and a 30-day like cultivation time until harvest, and it's been much more than that already. So you know, we're just kind of seeing like what happens when you just try to like take a garden and like take existing soil and make it do what you want. Soil quality is really important. We've learned that firsthand. So, you know, at home I might have like had a small garden with some topsoil that I bought. It was quality topsoil, but when you experiment with gardening with the soil that you've got, it's really good to think about on a longer term horizon. I think like compost and you know, soil amendments, mulching, and all that kind of stuff that we've been reading about. Over here, mostly eaten, nothing too exciting. We've got probably the most exciting radish area here. So those radishes are looking all right. And then I think the two things that we missed so far are the carrots, which are right behind you here. And those haven't been eaten. So they're looking a little sparse. The ground is looking a little bit dry. We actually missed watering yesterday. We've been watering just about every day, but those are, you know, I think those will be fine. And but those are a long time till harvest, so that will be in months when somebody's harvesting them. And then finally, the other end of the garden over here, we had some chard planted, and it's really been like pretty decimated. I'm not sure if there's anything really here much anymore. Maybe in the back, that's some chard. So if we'd been really on top of our game, we might have been, you know, planting some early plants that were, you know, really establishing fast, and then planting some others later that would kind of fill in the spaces, replanting seed when things weren't doing well. But, you know, we've learned what we've learned. There is a tomato that's doing pretty well in here, actually 2 tomatoes that are doing fine. Those aren't with the rest of the tomatoes, but those are all right. We've tasted these chili peppers, as I said over there. They're growing quite quickly, and they're super hot. This is a peach tree, and the fruits haven't grown too much in too long. I think maybe that will change in the rainy season. These are protecting, you know, somewhat maybe some chard that's growing here, but again, a lot of eaten stuff. And that's it for the pool garden. We may do a quick update on the orchard. That's it. Alright, so we're seeing the orchard. Because this may be the last video that we do, this is partly for me to just remember, you know, how much progress we made and what this looked like in the beginning and what it looked like in the end. So what we've mainly done recently is just put a lot of oak leaves at the base of the trees as a mulch, hopefully help them retain water, and hopefully help them produce more fruit for whoever's here later. The other thing we did in the orchard was a couple compost piles. Sherilyn mentioned she was going to do a bit of a different setup with fencing so that it's easier to move. But we've got a fresh compost pile here and then a processed compost pile here. And you know, nice to see some success with some good compost dirt that's probably just about ready to spread. So needs a little bit more water, and that's all for the orchard.
Yeah, I took 3 of these buckets down today in a wheelbarrow, and you guys have the wheelbarrow that you took 4 buckets, I think, from, you know, down at the whatever you were doing.
The black plastic one?
Yeah.
They're all up here.
And I was like, I took 3 of these down there this morning. Totally fucking distracted. Hi, we're at the bucket garden, which is doing really, really well. And we have the black buckets that we did some new plantings with. This is an Arugula. Because of the watering situation up here at this deck, we're going to be moving a lot of these down to the propagation garden so we can water easier. But we've had some nice yummy salads out of the bucket garden here. A lot of the lettuces are doing really, really well, so we're picking like the largest outer leaves and calling it like the microgreen salad. This was a second planting in this tub. It's looking really good, just about ready to be thinned for microgreens. Some of the things are looking a little tough, like the arugula especially is starting to bolt. You can see that it wants to go to flower. I'm going to go ahead and let it go to seed, and we'll save the seeds from that. It's no longer tender, so that was one of the concerns I had about this garden, because it is it's like the hottest time of year, the driest time of year, that potentially we would not get very much from some of these. But I think most of the lettuces and the chard, we're going to be running at least another month or more eating out of these tubs. They're super yummy.
Goes to show that if you use Tierra de Encino and chicken dirt, you get a lot better results than random dirt that might not have much nutrition to it.
We have ripe tomatoes in the propagation garden. It's really, really exciting. This is one of the volunteers, so we arrived and tomatoes were already growing. They weren't planted. About a dozen of them in this garden, and they're all putting on fruit, and I've seen about 4 of them that are getting some color on them, so super exciting. This is a bunch of buckets that were started a couple weeks ago. Some of them aren't doing anything. This is actually one from the original planting, Napa cabbage. It's going really slow, kind of a little bit like the pond garden slow. But one thing that I'm really, really excited about is this pot right here has Sweetmeat Squash in it. And it's one of my favorite winter squashes, and it's doing really, really well. And earlier today I was in this garden and I did a lot of up potting. So some of those have actually their own pots in this garden right now. I did some more propagating of willow, and I've been watering those pretty heavily because they like a lot of water. So these are newer willow propagation buckets. Back behind the willow, these are some of the bush beans that we transplanted into their own buckets. So they're just going to stay one plant in each bucket. Starting to get a few of the flowers on those. Also having some of the leaf miners happening on those. So I don't think it's going to be a problem. We're probably not going to be doing too much to avoid that, because I think the plants are going to be fine even though they're there. Scarlet runner beans are looking pretty good. Something's bothering them, but again, there's a lot of new growth down below, so I'm not too worried about the leaf miners on there. We have some beautiful flowers that are going to turn into beans, and they're getting pretty heavily flowered right now. Today I did some transplanting of a couple other bush beans from a different pot that was getting a little full. Moved a cucumber bucket here. This is a slicing cucumber. These ones were planted quite a ways after this little guy here, and I think they're gonna do really well and take over. I've also been doing some fertilizing with compost tea that was made out of chicken manure in all of the fruiting things in this garden. So that's been happening for the last couple of weeks. Bush beans here. We've got some actual, like you can see the white flowers coming on the bush beans. So that's really, really exciting. Everything in this area seems to be doing really, really well. Tomatillos are happening. I'm noticing the tomatillos are wanting water every single day. And so mostly tomatoes, tomatillos, and any of the babies in this area are getting water every day. Oh, and the Kohlrabi's getting water every day too, because they've really been looking kind of unhappy. So I've been watering them every day. And earlier today, there's been a pot over in this area looking really sad. It was an orchid pot. Over here you can see it blooming. It's orange to your right there. And so that's a pot full of orchids that could be planted out into like 50 different plants. And there was a very small pot that had so much orchid going on in it, there was hardly any soil left in the pot. So I have separated that into 13 pots, one of which, some have more than one plant in them. And then one of which, like it went on too long for me. So I ended up just putting like a clump into a big pot. But there'll be probably like 20 plants out of a pot that was about this size. Just completely overgrown orchid. So we'll have tons and tons of orchid babies. All these cans here are the same as that orange orchid that was just on film. We have a whole bunch of seeds coming up. This was... my vocabulary is completely shot. It's not the mustard, it's the cilantro. Oh, yeah. And so these seeds is called coriander, but basically it's a cilantro seed. So we're letting that go to seed, and we'll save the seeds from that. A lot of the mustard that was going to seed, I've pulled out of those pots. Actually, these pots were mostly mustard seeds. And so I have those hanging so that we can save those seeds later. This is a tomato that was another volunteer in the little volunteer area over there that's been up potted. This is one of the Katie's Sweetmeat Squashes, and I took a bunch out of this bucket today. These are the New Zealand pear tomato, one of my friend's very favorite tomato, and I have put some of them in other pots as well. This is bush beans that have been separated out a little bit. I've put them in other pots to grow. So basically a lot of moving around and transplanting. Some more Katie's Sweetmeat Squash here. These will be slated to go into outside gardens, like they'll actually be going in the ground. I've cleared some space over here to bring some of the new black salad buckets down to have early morning sun, not late sun. And I think the only other really exciting thing going on in this garden is our propagation table. Some things have been brought up that the C team have grown down at the casita, and so they've brought them up here so they'll get care once they take off on their next adventure. And we have like broccoli, we've got the summer squash going. Those will be transplanted into single pots and planted out into the garden as well. There's carrots, I think chard or beets. There's a cherry tomato happening here. There's a whole bunch of little basil babies I'm excited about. This is a beautiful morning glory flower just because I like pretty things. So there's only one seed that's not doing well here, and that's another summer squash. We do have another slicing cucumber. It's a different kind of cucumber than the one that's not doing so well, so I do have hope that potentially it will take off and we'll have cucumbers sooner rather than later, because the one we have is super stunted. Yeah, and I think that's it for the update on the propagation area. Oh.
Just to add here, these are peppers that we ate, saved the seeds from, and then planted. So
A bell pepper, yeah?
A bell pepper. You know what? I don't totally remember. They may have been those long yellow banana peppers.
Sure.
And so, we've got one this one actually wasn't transplanted. It's in its original pot. But the ones that were transplanted are growing a little bit less quickly, but still fine. We've been watering them all the time. You can see some ashes in there and other sort of things to make them healthy. And then these beets are doing way better than the ones in the pool garden. So
Yeah.
still not ready to plant in the ground or elsewhere, but Sherilyn's probably going to be the one taking care of that.
Yeah. They'll get eaten eventually by somebody or something.